Today, I'd first like to talk about reading Paul's letter. I know this may seem a little out of the ordinary because I usually focus on the gospel for my homily. But Jesus' gospel today is going to be better understood by talking about Paul's letter first. Paul tells us not to follow worldly ways, but to follow God's ways or the will of God, and that the will of God will always lead to good and pleasing and perfect life. When we talk about worldly ways, we talk about the values and views that are opposite to God's plan and His way. Let me give you an example. A worldly view would be that if someone insults you, you insult them back. If someone hurts you, you get even with them. You seek revenge. And that if you forgave that person, you'd be seen as a weak person. However, God's way is quite different than that. God wants each and every one of us to always be kind, even to people that hurt us, to forgive the person who causes us harm. If a person insults us or hurts us, we forgive them. And that's quite powerful and quite the opposite of the worldly view, but that's God's way. If we followed the ways of the world, then for sure we would be causing many more problems to erupt in the world. All we have to do is look at the TV and see on the news the sadness and the people suffering, the wars that are raging, the murders, and it goes on and on and on. But if we follow God's way, God's will, then there are less problems, and there would be less problems because we would be kinder to each other. We can look at a lot of examples throughout history of when we followed worldly ways or when people have followed God's way. When people have followed worldly ways, we see wars, we see dictators that have persecuted entire groups of people. But looking at following God's ways, well, let's look at one example of Martin Luther King and how he fought for the black African American community, an oppressed group of people by white people. But they stood up and they said enough is enough. And the white people were so enraged that they took to violence, shooting them, hurting them. But the black community did not retaliate or did not do the same. They did not seek revenge. They were peaceful about their protest, and white people looked the fool. People began to understand the plight of the African Americans in the black community, and legislation was passed to protect equal rights. And because of their kindness, it touched people's hearts. If they had sought revenge, then people probably would not have supported them. In today's gospel, Peter wants us to be careful and not follow worldly ways. He wants us to follow God's way. And yes, we may suffer, we may be persecuted, but through patience and kindness, people can change and the world can become a better place. So it's possible that God gives us the strength to always choose His way, even though we may have to suffer, but He'll lead us to a way that's better for all of us. God bless you.